Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Aileen stood at the edge of the village, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains shrouded in mist. The ancient prophecy echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the world's fate. When the darkness rises, the sword of the stars will be the only hope. The words were as old as time, passed down through generations, but now, with the encroaching darkness swallowing cities and consuming lives, the prophecy felt more like a curse than a promise. She tightened her grip on the hilt of her sword, the leather worn smooth from years of training. Aileen was a knight, sworn to protect her people, yet even she felt the weight of despair that hung over the land. The darkness had taken so much already: her brother, her home, her sense of peace. All that remained was her determination, a burning resolve to find the sword of the stars and save the world from its inevitable destruction. The village elder had tried to dissuade her, citing the countless others who had sought the sword and never returned. But Aileen knew she had no choice. The visions had shown her the path, the sword's location hidden deep within the ancient temple in the northern mountains. It was a journey fraught with danger, but Aileen was ready. She had to be as she turned away from the village, her heart heavy with the farewell she couldn't bear to make. Aileen was joined by her companions. Eldrick, the aging mentor who had taught her everything she knew about combat and survival, walked beside her with a calm that belied his years. His wisdom had guided her through many trials, and his presence was a comfort, even in these dark times. Leora, the skilled archer with eyes as sharp as her arrows, followed close behind. She had her own reasons for joining the quest, though she seldom spoke of them. Aileen knew Leora had suffered losses too, and perhaps that was why they understood each other so well, their unspoken bond forged in the fires of shared pain. Finn, the thief with a past as shadowy as the darkness they fought, brought up the rear. He was an enigma, a man who seemed to carry more secrets than a dragon's hoard. But Aileen had seen the flashes of loyalty in his actions, the way he always watched their backs when danger loomed. She trusted him, even if she didn't fully understand him. Together, they set out on the path to the mountains, the first leg of a journey that would test their strength, their resolve, and their very souls. The days passed in a blur of rugged terrain and relentless travel. They crossed dense forests where the trees whispered ancient warnings in the wind, and trudged through icy wastelands where the cold bit deep into their bones. The darkness was always there, a lurking presence that seemed to grow stronger the closer they came to their goal. It manifested in strange ways: shadows that moved on their own, the sudden appearance of monstrous creatures that defied nature, and the overwhelming sense of dread that hung over them like a shroud. Aileen's sleep was plagued by nightmares, visions of the darkness consuming everything she loved. In these dreams, she would reach out for the sword of the stars, only to have it crumble to dust in her hands. Each morning, she awoke more determined, but also more fearful. What if the sword didn't exist? What if she failed? Eldrick sensed her doubts, though he never voiced them. Instead, he offered quiet reassurances, sharing stories of past heroes who had faced insurmountable odds and emerged victorious. His words were like a balm to her troubled soul, but they couldn't fully dispel the fears that gnawed at her. Leora was a steady presence, her sharp eyes always scanning the horizon, her bow never far from her hand. She was the first to notice the changes in the landscape as they neared the temple: trees that seemed to wither as they passed, animals that fled at their approach, the sky darkening as if in mourning. Finn, too, became more vigilant, his usual levity replaced by a grim focus. He moved with a stealth that belied his size, his eyes constantly darting to the shadows. Aileen often caught him muttering under his breath, though she couldn't make out the words. She wondered what secrets he was keeping, and whether they would be enough to protect them from the dangers ahead. One night, as they camped beneath the stars, Aileen finally voiced the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you think the Sword of the Stars is real?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Eldrick looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "The sword is real, Aileen, but it is not just a weapon. It is a symbol of hope, a beacon for those who fight against the darkness. Whether it can be wielded by human hands, that is something we will only know when we find it." Leora nodded, her gaze fixed on the flames of the campfire. "It has to be real. If it's not, then all of this, everything we've lost, it's all for nothing." Finn said nothing, his face hidden in the shadows. Aileen wondered if he, too, harbored doubts, or if his silence was his way of coping with the fear that gripped them all. The next morning, they reached the foot of the mountains. The air was thick with tension as they began their ascent, the path growing steeper and more treacherous with each step. The darkness pressed in on them from all sides, a living entity that sought to crush their spirits. But Aileen pressed on, driven by a force she couldn't fully explain, a mixture of duty, desperation, and a faint glimmer of hope. After days of climbing, they finally stood before the entrance to the ancient temple. It was a massive structure, carved into the side of the mountain, its stone walls covered in strange, otherworldly symbols that seemed to pulse with an inner light. The air was heavy with an unnatural silence, as if the very world was holding its breath. Aileen took a deep breath and stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The others followed, their expressions tense but resolute. Inside, the temple was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each more foreboding than the last. The walls seemed to close in around them, the darkness growing thicker with every step. They encountered traps and illusions designed to test their resolve, bottomless pits that appeared out of nowhere, walls that shifted and changed, voices that whispered doubts into their ears. But Aileen pushed through it all, her mind focused on one thing, the Sword of the Stars. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the heart of the temple. There, in the center of a vast chamber, stood a pedestal made of pure crystal. And upon it, glowing with a light that seemed to come from the heavens themselves, was the Sword of the Stars. Aileen approached it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. The sword was beautiful beyond words, its blade a shimmering silver that seemed to hold the very essence of the stars. She reached out, her hand trembling, and grasped the hilt. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, as her fingers closed around the hilt, a surge of energy shot through her, knocking her back. The sword fell from the pedestal, clattering to the ground, its light dimming. Aileen stared at it in shock, her mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. She reached for the sword again, but it was as if an invisible barrier held her back. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't lift it. "It's not possible," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "The prophecy, it said I would wield the sword and save the world." Eldrick placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression filled with sorrow. "The prophecy may have been misinterpreted, Aileen. The sword is here, but it is bound by a magic that rejects human touch. We must find another way." "But how?" Leora asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "We've come all this way, and now we're supposed to just give up?" Finn finally spoke, his voice low and intense. "We don't give up. We find a way to break the magic." Aileen looked at him, hope rekindling in her chest. "How?" Finn hesitated, then took a deep breath. "There's an ancient ritual, one that can unlock the power of the sword. But it's dangerous, and it requires a sacrifice." Eldrick's eyes widened in alarm. "Finn, you can't be serious. That ritual was forbidden for a reason. It could kill her." "It's the only way," Finn insisted. "The darkness is closing in, and if we don't do this, there won't be anything left to save. Aileen looked between them, her mind racing. She didn't want to die, but she also knew that she couldn't let the world fall into darkness. She had come this far, and she couldn't turn back now. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice steady. Finn hesitated, then explained the ritual. It involved channeling the energy of the stars, using her own life force to break the magic that bound the sword. It was a dangerous process, one that could easily overwhelm her and burn her out from the inside. But it was the only way to unlock the sword's power. Aileen listened carefully, her mind processing the risks. She knew it was a gamble, but it was one she was willing to take. She had to. For her brother, for her village, for the world. "Let's do it," she said, her voice filled with determination. Eldrick tried to dissuade her, but she was resolute. She knew the risks, and she was prepared to face them. With Finn's guidance, she began the ritual, drawing on the energy of the stars and focusing it through her body. It was an intense experience, the power surging through her like wildfire, threatening to consume her, but Aileen held on, her mind focused on one thing, the sword. She had to unlock its power. She had to save the world. As the ritual reached its climax, the room was filled with a blinding light. Aileen screamed as the energy tore through her, but she didn't let go. She couldn't. The light intensified, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire temple would be consumed by the power she had unleashed. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished. Aileen collapsed to the ground, her body trembling with exhaustion. She had done it. The sword was free. Eldrick and the others rushed to her side, but she waved them off, her eyes fixed on the sword of the stars. It lay on the ground, its blade glowing with a soft, ethereal light. Slowly, painfully, Aileen reached out and grasped the hilt. This time, there was no resistance. The sword was warm in her hand, its power flowing through her like a gentle current. She had done it. She had unlocked the power of the sword, but there was no time to celebrate. The darkness was closing in, and they could feel its presence like a physical weight pressing down on them. Aileen knew that the final battle was upon them, and she had to be ready. With the sword of the stars in hand, she led her companions out of the temple. The darkness awaited them, a monstrous, all-consuming force that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. It had taken on a form now, a twisted, shadowy figure that towered over them, its eyes burning with hatred. Aileen didn't hesitate. She charged forward, the sword of the stars blazing with light as she struck at the heart of the darkness. The impact was like a thunderclap, the force of it driving the darkness back. But it wasn't enough. The darkness regrouped, its form shifting and growing, as if feeding on the very fear and despair that filled the air. Leora's arrows flew through the air, striking the darkness with deadly precision, but they seemed to have little effect. Finn fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his daggers flashing in the dim light, but even he couldn't seem to land a decisive blow. Eldrick chanted ancient spells, his magic crackling in the air, but the darkness absorbed it all, growing stronger with each passing moment. Aileen fought with everything she had, the sword's power surging through her, but the darkness was relentless. It was as if the very shadows of the world had come to life, intent on consuming everything in its path. She felt herself growing weaker, the energy she had used to unlock the sword's power draining her strength. But she couldn't give up. She wouldn't. She had to find a way to defeat the darkness, to end this once and for all. And then, in the midst of the chaos, she realized what she had to do. The sword of the stars wasn't just a weapon, it was a conduit for the energy of the stars, a link to the very fabric of the universe. And she, Aileen, was the key. She closed her eyes, blocking out the sounds of battle, the screams of her companions, the roar of the darkness. She focused inward, drawing on the last of her strength, and reached out with her mind, connecting with the sword, with the stars, with the very essence of the universe, and then she unleashed it all. The sword blazed with a light so bright that it blinded everyone, even the darkness itself. Aileen felt the power surge through her, burning her from the inside out, but she held on, pouring everything she had into that final, desperate strike. The darkness shrieked, a sound that echoed through the mountains, through the world, as it was torn apart by the light. The shadows disintegrated, the malevolent energy dissipating into nothingness. The ground shook, the air crackled with electricity, and then, with a final, deafening roar, the darkness was gone. Aileen collapsed to the ground, the sword falling from her hand. She was exhausted, every ounce of strength drained from her body. But she had done it. The darkness was defeated. Her companions rushed to her side, their faces filled with concern. Eldrick knelt beside her, his hands glowing with healing magic, but Aileen knew it wouldn't be enough. She had used too much of her own life force in that final attack. There was no coming back from this, but that was okay. She had known the risks. She had accepted them. And now, with the world safe, she could finally rest. She smiled at her friends, her vision fading as the darkness of unconsciousness claimed her. "It's over," she whispered. "The world is safe." And then she was gone. Eldrick, Leora, and Finn stood in silence, their hearts heavy with grief. Aileen had sacrificed everything to save the world, and now she was gone. But her legacy would live on, in the stories they would tell, in the world she had saved. They buried her at the foot of the mountains, marking her grave with the sword of the stars, its blade still glowing with the faintest hint of the light that had saved them all. And as they stood there, gazing up at the sky, they knew that Aileen was watching over them, a guardian of the stars, forevermore. The world had been saved, but it had come at a great cost. Aileen had transcended her humanity, becoming something greater, something beyond the reach of mortals. And though she was gone, her spirit would live on in the light of the stars, a beacon of hope for all who would face the darkness in the future. And so, the story of Aileen, the young knight who had saved the world, would be told for generations to come, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the power of hope. And in the hearts of those who remembered her, the light of the sword of the stars would never fade.